Today is August 13th, 2019. My name is Jenny Matz, and it is my great honor to be interviewing Ted Sarandos here at Netflix in Los Angeles for the Interviews and Oral History of Television.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. So, what was your name at birth?
Theodore Anthony Sarandos, Jr.
And when and where were you born?
I was born July 30th, 1964 at Monmouth County Medical Center in Long Branch, New Jersey.
Oh, you were born in New Jersey?
Yeah.
When did you move to Phoenix?
When I was a kid, probably 6 years old, yeah.
So talk briefly a little bit about your childhood in Phoenix. What did your parents do?
My dad was a union electrician, and my mom was a housewife. I had 5 kids, got married very young, or had kids very young, and got married very young. So they had 5, I'm one of 5. My brother unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But I realized when I was in my 20s that my parents had 4 kids in their 20s. And what a different life that was, yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
And how did that affect you with the hectic atmosphere of that home growing up? What, were you left to your own devices?
Yeah, I mean, I say I was raised by wolves, but it was a very free-spirited place. I mean, there wasn't no time schedule, that people were coming and going, and the house was loud, and dinner was unpredictable when it was happening, if it was happening. So yeah, you kind of fend for yourself a little bit. I love my mother and father. They did the best they could, but what did they know about raising kids? They were 20 years old.
Was the television on a lot?
The television was always on. That was the constant. That was the predictable part of my life. Was the Happy Days was on Channel 3 at 7 o'clock on Tuesday nights.
What else did you watch growing up?
I watched everything. I would think probably the most impactful thing watching-wise for me was late-night television, because I was never much of a sleeper. I'd sleep 5 or 6 hours a night. And so even while I was going to school, I would start, there was this back-to-back-to-back KPHO TV5 in Phoenix that would air the Dick Van Dyke Show, the Andy Griffith Show, the Jack Benny Show, Burns and Allen. And I've seen every one of those shows, every one of those episodes 100 times. And love them.
So what were some of the interests that you wanted to pursue at that time in high school and looking towards a career?
I was pretty unstructured up until the time I got into high school. I mean, for better or worse, the downside of my parents being young and not terribly focused on education, where there was really no talk about what do you want to be and what do you want to do. So I didn't really have a plan until I got into high school, and I'm sure also influenced by television, by Lou Grant, as I thought I was going to be a journalist. And I loved the idea. They were superheroes to me, journalists. Mm-hmm. And I wound up going on this high school newspaper, and eventually this is because I was a terrible student, I spent all my academic time working on the newspaper. And I liked putting the newspaper together, doing the design work, and all the good that I thought journalism could do for the world. And I just had one big problem, which was I was a terrible writer. So I needed a plan B. No.
And you actually met Lou Grant.
I did meet Lou Grant, yeah. So Ed Asner was interesting. Besides just inspiring me on television, he was really instrumental, I think, in where I sit today. This is in Phoenix, Arizona still. It was one of those dog days of summer. I was writing for the school newspaper, and the city newspaper, the Phoenix Gazette, had an extension thing they used to do on Saturday in the Saturday paper called the Teen Gazette, and high school journalists could submit articles for it. And this was in the height of Lou Grant's kind of success, in the height of the controversy of the Kimberly Clark had pulled out of advertising on Lou Grant because he was involved in the war in Nicaragua, or his support for the war in Nicaragua. I'm sorry, not for the support. we'll clean that up, right? He was not supporting the war. He was supporting the other guys. So Kimberly Clark pulls out, and Lou Grant basically, ultimately, gets canceled, and Ed hadn't done a lot of press about it, and he went kind of quiet. And I was writing for the Teen Gazette, and I was also freelance, selling freelance articles to what was in the early days of cable TV. They used to have cable TV guides that were independent magazines in each market, and there was one called The Entertainer, and I wanted to get an interview with Ed to talk about Lou Grant, and he was also the president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time. And I went to the hotel where he was coming to speak to the local SAG members at a meeting. And when I caught him on the way in, he said, I'll do this with you. And I think he probably felt that he was doing a nice thing for a kid. But I'm going to have to go do this meeting first. Will you wait? And I said, sure. And the meeting turned out to be, I don't know what the controversial topic was, but it was a 6-hour meeting. And I don't know why I waited, but I waited. And when he came out, he goes, "You still here?" And I said, "Yeah." So he couldn't do the interview now because he was late, and he gave me his office number, and we wound up doing the interview over the phone. It was his generosity of time, to do the follow-up and allow to do that, that also led to this conversation about politics and about entertainment. And to me, it was a kind of a crystallizing moment of where these interests lined up, of the impact that media has on the world, the impact that people can bring their influence and their fame to a topic they care a lot about, and this kind of confluence of, yes, you want to be a journalist, but what do you want to write about? And so and through that, for that interview, he introduced me to Martin Sheen, who was doing all this work with a Catholic priest named Blaise Pontaine, who I went and saw him speak several times and learned all about, Central America and South America politics, what was happening in the world. And then on the other side, just on the entertainment side, he also introduced me to Ann Gillian, who also agreed to do an interview, who was quite hot at that time. And so through that, it became a web of contacts that really influenced everything about my life.
But you didn't want to continue pursuing journalism at that point?
Well, I got I paid my own way through school, and I was working part-time at a video store.
Is this Arizona?
Arizona Video Cassettes West. So it was like the second video store in the state of Arizona that opened up, and again, kind of by some stroke of luck, it was in my neighborhood. But I was going to school, and I had this kind of realization that I probably wasn't going to be a writer professionally. I was reading one of my articles that I wrote, and I said, if I didn't write this, I wouldn't keep reading this. And so I thought, well, if I'm not going to be a writer, what am I going to do? I don't really know. So, and I can tell you the article that for me was, and I love doing the interviews, and I love doing the research. It's just both the combination of, I think, just raw talent and that it takes to become, to be a great writer. And I think the discipline of sitting down to a blank page and writing. And I was probably just too antsy at the time. But also during that period, I wrote a series called Primetime Puberty and interviewed Michael J. Fox, who was then between season 1 and season 2 of Family Ties, Todd Bridges, and Peter Billingsley, who was then on Real People and went on obviously to be Peter Billingsley, Ralphie from Christmas Story, and a great friend of mine still today.
So very much you were bit by the entertainment bug in some fashion, and you just didn't know how to form your way through it.
Yeah, TV was such an influential part of my life, and I never aspired to be on TV or even then to make TV. But I knew I wanted to be around the box. I wanted to be around those people in the box, because honestly, in my chaotic world, the people inside the box were were living a life that I kind of maybe fantasized about. They all had a very structured life. They all, because they're, the Andy Griffith show and those kind of the influence of probably 1950s television, even though I wasn't even born yet, that would later have on me was that it taught me a lot about just life structure and family dynamics and friendships and all those things. I think I learned all that's on television.
So now you rose through the ranks at Arizona Video and
Video Cassettes West, yes.
And then you became the vice president of product and merchandising at Video City West.
Yeah, well, I did a stint in between. I went from I went to East Texas Distributing, which is a company that sold the movies to the video stores, and that I went in as a salesman, and became the regional operations, sales and operations director for them. And it was $1 billion private company that sold movies to all the video stores in the country. And we really got our big break by being the distributor to Blockbuster. And so I got very close to the Blockbuster operators and learned the business, the retailing business on a much larger scale than we could do it at Arizona Video Cassettes became Superstar Video. And then I left there to go to East Texas Distributing. And then back to retail for about a year to West Coast Video and Video City.
And then you really saw the transition to DVD during this time from VHS.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about that. Did something stick in your brain about that shift?
Yeah. It's pretty remarkable if I think about how lucky all these turn of events are for me, because that video store opening in my neighborhood and my mom, with all the chaos in our house, we literally you pick a utility, it was probably turned off at one time or another at any given time. We never had the phone, the electric, and the gas all on at the same time. But my mom would always do things like we had a VCR when no one had a VCR. And it was like an iron lung, it was this big. But we had a VCR, and which made no sense to have a VCR in our socioeconomic class at the time. We had a dish to get HBO, so we always had HBO. We always had ever since I remember, we had these real luxuries at that time. And for whatever reason, my mom seemed to prioritize entertainment for me too. But she was doing it for herself, but also for me. I was in the house. So all that, and then and I take this job at Video City. They had stores all in medium markets, so they weren't like in big cities, and all of them had a military base. And on these military bases, it's young male populations who have expendable money. Early tech adopters were buying DVD players early. So we saw all this demand for DVDs way before the major markets were. So, and we were kind of faced with this dilemma, which was that people were coming in wanting to rent or buy DVDs, and we didn't have them. And in some of these markets, it was a big play. So we saw the demand swinging in a way that when I would watch people walk into the store and say, I don't know why I remember this, but it was Saving Private Ryan was the big title that week. And people first thing they would do is go to the VHS wall, find it, and then go to the DVD wall and then swap it. They'd rather see the DVD, but they wanted to make sure they had the movie first. And it was like you're watching these people kind of making a choice almost between technology and story. Like the Saving Private Ryan was happening, and now I'm going to pick which way I'm going to watch it tonight. I want to see it on DVD. So just kind of watching that behavior, I wound up, we wound up going out and investing in how do we expand our DVD fast. Blockbuster was struggling with this. I knew this from my fulfillment days, and they were tied up in these long-term deals with the studios to do VHS revenue sharing. And the studios would not allow them to take one VHS tape off the shelf to put on a DVD. So, and we had none of these deals in place at Video City at the time. So my first revenue share deals really were, I went to the studios who were most enthusiastic about DVD, which was Warner Brothers and Sony, and we made a revenue share arrangement for them, which was kind of an unheard of thing. VHS revenue sharing made sense because there were $100 tapes, and to buy them was $100, but these were $15 disc. But at the time, the company wasn't doing that well. So we didn't have to tie up any cash to buy a lot of inventory. I got the studios to agree to give us the inventory, and we'd pay them every time it rented. And to get more of that, they also consigned large inventories of DVDs to sell through in our stores. And one of the things I did on the merchandising side was realize that for those stores that were really early DVD, some of them were doing 25, 26% of their business in DVD before Netflix and before Blockbuster even had a DVD on the shelf. We took the two middle shelves of the new release wall all the way around the store and made that the DVD. Instead of having a separate DVD section they had to go to at the back of the store. So we actually moved it front and center and sent a signal to people that we were going to have it. So
right, and then the Warner Brothers deal you just talked about, that actually caught the attention of Reed Hastings. That's what got him to notice you?
Yeah, I was on the cover of Video Business Magazine with this article about this new deal because no one had done one before. And so Reed saw the article. Netflix had was pretty much in its infancy. Had a big challenge, which is that it was the technology to operate Netflix, even when we were mailing DVDs around, operating the website and managing inventory and paying postage, and a very cash consumptive business. And as we were growing, they needed more and more disc all the time. And when he read that article, I thought, revenue share, it's a good way to get big fast. How do I make a deal like that? And we had a mutual friend, someone who I used to sell movies to in their video store, called Mitch Lowe. He had a store up in Marin County called Video Droid. And he and I were both chapter presidents of the Video Software Dealers Association in our days. And but he had since gone on to work with Reed, and he said, I know Ted. So he introduced us.
Oh, wow. And what was your impression of him when you first met him?
Well, first let me to tell you that I was not an early adopter. It was literally my very first e-commerce transaction was buying that plane ticket to go on Southwest to fly up to San Jose to meet Reed. And I was blown away by Reed immediately. He had a sense of clarity about technology, about the business. When I say business, I don't mean the entertainment business, general business dynamics that was very logical and very sound. And he was one of his early things he said was that every bit of filmed entertainment is going to come into the home on the internet. That means no cable, that means no broadcast, no satellite. And he said it was so definitively, like there was no doubt that this was going to happen.
Were you sold?
No. At that time, someone had emailed me a video clip from South Park. It would take 7 days to open it up. Right. I mean, there was no the leap from that to the world he painted just seemed crazy to me. And he also said, and he said something so off the cuff to me. And I remember I wasn't that tech oriented. And he said, no, there's a thing called Moore's Law. The internet is going to get twice as fast at half the price every 18 months. And the compounding benefit of that is going to make the internet a viable distribution choice within a couple of years. And by the way, followed that exact path. The internet got twice as fast at half the price every 18 months. And it became, we started streaming in 2007, and there was nothing really to watch, but we had streaming content, and it was the bandwidth was very expensive, and so basically what we were watching was the cost of postage kind of creeping up, which was our core business of mailing DVDs around, and the cost of bandwidth dropping dramatically. So when these 2 points crossed, then we knew that the streaming business would be real. And remember, we were talking about downloading then. Streaming didn't even exist.
Right.
So this was just downloading, and then without even thinking about how are you going to manage all those files, how are you going to do all this. So
how did you go from this crazy person coming in and telling you that this was the future to accepting a job at Netflix, a chief content officer?
Not right away. I do remember not being able to shake that meeting, thinking I don't know if any of those things he said was true, but he, in a way, I was thinking about. I mean, that's a pretty that's a pretty world-changing view that he described, and I thought, I bet nobody ever did change the world without telling someone they were going to do it. So and they probably sounded crazy. But at the time when I joined, West Coast Video, we bought a company called West Coast Video and Video City merged, and these were both pretty financially broken companies, and the idea was that we'd put these two things together. You know how well that worked. And
wrongs make a right.
Yeah, well, and plus one business, the Video City based in Philadelphia, was a store. They were big kind of blockbuster-like stores, and their core business was selling franchises. So in that world, you wanted it to appear to be successful. We had big, beautiful, shiny offices in Philadelphia, and then Video City was all these medium market, high margin operating stores. And we had our office was in an industrial center in Bakersfield, California. So you had to go back and forth between these worlds, and we were trying to merge them together. So I was trying to do the deals with studios, trying to get on revenue share arrangements, trying to expand on our DVD success in other markets. And so Reed was telling me about Netflix and what the vision for the company was going to be, and I just went back to work. And he called a couple of times. And he said, really, I'm offering you a role. Do you want to come on and do this with us? And I explained to him how busy I was. And I said, I've got deals with studios that I've got to close. I've got stores that we're selling. We're selling franchisees. Some of our buyers were stealing. I wound up firing all of them. And so he goes, wow, it sounds like they really need you there. But keep in mind, I'm in a terrible hotel in Philadelphia in the middle of the winter, and he, going back and forth between the cities, and he said, it sounds like they really need you there. And I said, yeah, they need me here. And he goes, well, don't they need you somewhere in the world feeding starving children? Why are you doing that? And I just laughed and said, oh, I'm in.
That's what got you.
Yeah.
So what was your role, what did your role entail as Chief Content Officer at Netflix in 2000 when you first got there?
So at that time, we were 100% domestic DVD by mail. And it was inventory management and buying the content and trying to predict how many copies of what you would need. How do you source basically everything on DVD? We had over 100,000 titles at some point available on DVD, everything ever published pretty much. And how do you build those business models out of managing the scale and scope of that size of a library on demand?
Did you
I
have
remember the underlying thesis of mailing DVDs around
Yeah.
was back to Reed's computer science days in school, that he had a project that was what is the cheapest and most efficient way to move large chunks of data across the country? And everyone had all these different compression ideas that could never do on and on. And Reed's idea was put them on cards and put them in a station wagon and drive them across. And it'll take a couple of days, but you wouldn't be able to touch the economics of being able to move the data that fast. And so basically moving the DVD by mail it would take a couple of days, but it was far cheaper and more accessible than the uncompressed data at the time.
And how did you base your acquisition strategy on what to buy for Netflix at that point?
Well, remember the one thing we had in our DVD days that even video stores didn't have was it was all automated, so that if you had 5 copies of a movie on the shelf and it was out of stock, no one asked for it anymore. So you had no idea what the demand was anymore. So what we had was this queue system where people would put in their queue, and you knew how many copies you need based on how many people had it at the top of their queue. So you're trying to predict when they're going to return a disc and when they're going to do it, and all that was actually quite predictable. And then what the great thing was is every time something was out of stock, it was recorded. So basically, you could replicate a perfect inventory system. How many copies would I have needed if I was perfectly in stock? And then how out of stock can we be before people say the service isn't very good? And we also had the benefit of being able to automatically give you your second choice. And in a video store, the joke of the video stores at the end was that it was called the managed dissatisfaction, like the art of the second choice, all those kind of things. Basically, you were not going to get what you came in for, and we had to do better than that. And the beauty is that we always looked at the DVD by mail being the bridge. We never thought that was going to be the core business. We knew the DVD would not be long for this world when this digital technology took over. So we never really built a dependency on it. It was really a way to get people in the habit of managing subscription entertainment, managing credit cards, and more importantly, managing how people choose content to watch. And the other thing that Reed said back in that meeting, it was actually late 1999 when we met, was that the big debate in the film industry was digital distribution. Who was going to pay to put the digital projectors into theaters? And the big prize was going to be you wouldn't have to move prints around anymore. And you think about that and say, well, that's the cheapest thing a studio does is mail prints around. So changing digital distribution doesn't change the economics of the studio much. Marketing does.
Right.
So if you knew what people wanted and you could show them what they wanted and they didn't even know what they wanted yet, then you could change the economics of the entire business.
Was trying to design those early algorithms of what it is people wanted, was that something that was in development that early?
Yeah, it was always it was something that started with the DVD business, try to understand. So there's this dynamic, and again, this kind of again back to the video store days. I was always fascinated with why I couldn't get a Woody Allen movie to break even. $100 to get a tape on the shelf. Certainly, there's enough people, who would like a Woody Allen movie that you could pay for the tape, and not in any store in any side of town would one of them work. And it was the notion. What I learned there was this kind of the idea of the taste. There's plenty of Woody Allen fans, just not within the trade radius of any one of those stores. So there weren't enough people to like him or to want to see his movies to pay for them. But if I had 5 of those tapes in the middle of town and everyone would go to them, there's plenty of demand for them. So, and then if you take that to the natural extreme, you could have one copy of a movie in 1,000 stores and none of them break even. But if you had 1,000 copies in the middle of the country and a national trade radius, it'd be very successful. So it was just about the trade radius and demand matching, and the smaller the niches got, the harder that was to manage. Right. So with Netflix, what we always had was a national inventory and a national distribution center, so we could aggregate all those niches into really meaningful businesses.
Now, why, in 2007 is when you started the streaming service, which is almost 10 years into the life of Netflix as a company. Why was that the right time, and what had to happen on the tech side and on the content side for that to work for your launch?
Well, on the tech side, it was that crossing point between when streaming movies out became cheaper than mailing them out. And that happened, on the content side, it wasn't really contemplated yet what this business would be. My theory is that it was going to be a lot like television licensing. It is moving pictures in a box, right? And the pipe didn't really seem to matter. So the idea of that, but it was important to know who would control the rights and who would license them out. So most studios at that time had a digital division, which, whatever that meant, and then a home video division and a theatrical division. And the home video division sold the VHS and the DVDs, and the digital division would sometimes, but the TV division controlled all the rights. All the money was licensing to television. So licensing the syndication rights and licensing to local television stations, reruns of television, was really the power center of the programming. So getting to know those people and getting those deals done was going to be the big challenge of the next 10 years.
And that was the biggest challenge for you?
Well, first it was figuring out what's available, and the studios themselves didn't really even know because they weren't sure what this right was. It was not pay-per-view; it was subscription. They knew that it was in conflict with their pay TV deals because they were all mostly bound by subscription. So I couldn't license very many movies back then because the pay TV deals clearly this would be in violation too. Mostly what we were licensing was TV shows, old movies, and TV shows that had been canceled. So they were not in syndication or in any other conflict. And the very first show that we licensed that was still on television, so it was the reruns of it, but we were licensing Nip Tuck was the very first show we licensed on Netflix that was in season. We licensed from Warner Brothers.
Now you at one point did try to separate out the DVD side and the streaming side of the business, and talk about that and what you learned from that experience.
Well, because there was hardly anything to watch on the DVD side, basically what we did was we offered the streaming for free to our DVD subscribers, and it was like a bonus, basically. And what was happening within about 18 months of our streaming launch, we finally had a movie that more people watched more hours of on streaming than watched on the DVD. What was that movie? I think it was John Cusack disaster movie, 2013. Is that the name of it?
Oh, I don't remember.
We'll have to Google that.
We will. We have someone working on it.
But that was a movie we had licensed through this deal we had with Starz to basically put their programming on Netflix, and more people watched that movie on streaming than turned the DVD, and that's when we knew that was kind of a flashpoint in the business.
Right. So, but what happened with the decision to move the DVD to Quickster?
So eventually we said, the DVD is not going to be our future. The streaming would be our future. So we started moving our employee resources, particularly engineering resources, away from the DVD business and to the streaming business. And it was the first kind of mandate was make this work, pull people if you can, don't hurt the DVD business. That's all the profit and all the revenue of the company. Within pretty short order it's okay to hurt the DVD business a little. And then it was very much screw the DVD business. This is our future. And it got to the point where we actually stopped inviting the DVD employees to the company meeting. I mean, it was that cut and dry. And that's the internal one. The external one was probably the biggest challenge that the company ever went through, which was we were going to separate the DVD. Now the streaming business had value, and we wanted to. We thought this would be the point where we'd say, look, we're going to have 2 separate subscriptions, one for streaming and one for DVD. And if you want both, you subscribe to both if you want. And if you just want to take DVDs, basically no cost, no impact. If you just want to stream, you actually get a $1 price cut from the current subscription. And so we thought this would be a no-brainer. People would just figure out what they want and go on about their day. There was a sense that it was unfair. That there was a group that got a price. The people who wanted both got a big price increase, and even the people who didn't want both felt like their neighbor got screwed in a way, and there was a mass exodus of subscribers that we did not forecast properly. We figured that some people would quit, more because we figured the people who'd be impacted negatively would. We just didn't factor in the people who were not negatively impacted being angry. And so some of them quit, more so than we forecast. And it was our first kind of big negative quarter in our announcements, and it was very loud. We formed a separate company for the streaming business called Quickster, or the DVD business called Quickster. That people hated the name, and it became like the poster child for everything we're doing wrong at that moment. After doing everything right for so long. Yeah.
How did you remedy? How did you correct course?
Well, one of them was we had to first acknowledge that it was, the mistake, which was this separating the website and doing all these things that, not acknowledge, things that people were very comfortable with, and realizing that no, people are just really comfortable. They don't mess with what people are really comfortable with without doing it slowly. Roll it out much slower. We were really, the thing that I think has been the most beneficial for Netflix has been our kind of bias to action and moving fast. In that case, it was our Achilles heel. We should have just slowed down and just said, hey, we're going to do this next year, and we're going to try this, and just message it over and over and over again. And we just moved really fast. So the best thing we did was slowed down, and we just took a beat. We announced that we were not going to do this thing called Quickster, and that we would, but we ultimately did do everything we said that we did back then. We just took a beat and did an apology video that was super awkward. That became, I think it was the first time we ever got spoofed on Saturday Night Live was our apology video. But it was a good, humbling experience for the business and for everyone in it to really make sure that, you're taking a lot of consideration into how people behave and what people love and what people don't. And people had the nice thing too is people had and continue to have a real relationship with Netflix. I mean, some people online that they even say that their relationship status is in a relationship with Netflix. I mean, it is a different thing that I don't think we fully appreciated back then.
Did it make you have any kind of impetus to collect more information from those viewers so that you wouldn't make a mistake that they would revolt again?
No, I just think it was more around understanding that moving fast is great for business, and it's not great necessarily for all other human interactions. Yeah.
So you could still rent DVDs from Netflix.
Yeah, there's still a few
today.
million people that rent DVDs on Netflix. Yeah.
So do you think that's going to always be the case, or
I don't know. I know that the people who do still love the service. The people who do it because they're either very hardcore movie lovers and they love a lot of niche content that you can't get on any other services, or that they live in a part of the world or part of the country that has very slow broadband and can't stream properly. And sometimes it might just be that they are also an age demographic that just isn't going to try new things. But but I think it's obviously a smaller and smaller number of people, and it does still serve a need in the country, and people like it. So.
Yeah. Let's move on to the path to original programming.
Yeah.
Talk about Red Envelope Entertainment and when and why you started that.
I like to think that Red Envelope Entertainment was ahead of its time. That's what people say when something is unsuccessful. We basically invested about $10 million at the time into starting something called Red Envelope Entertainment, which is obviously not enough to do anything at scale, but it was a good enough thing to cut our teeth on and figure out if we could create original programming primarily for the DVD service, but that would eventually become streaming content that we would have access to. And it was kind of serving the niches. So it was art house film, documentary, foreign language film, and stand-up comedy. And We end up building a library of about 113 films between acquisitions and productions. The very first Netflix original anything was a documentary called The Comedians of Comedy. It was Zach Galifianakis. It was Patton Oswalt's tour. It was Zach Galifianakis, Brian Posehn, and Maria Bamford. And it followed their tour and premiered at South by Southwest. And got great reviews and plays really well on Netflix and really pushed everyone, all those careers. No one had heard of Zach Galifianakis then. I was a big fan, but I was kind of a comedy nerd.
I saw a taping.
Oh,
in
really?
Boston, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that tour, you learned a lot. We learned a lot on that tour because when we were shooting the doc, couple of things that I actually learned that I still stick with me about our own production. One of them was you needed an objective person who wasn't on the tour, who wasn't at the shoot to watch the footage, because people a lot of times they would shoot these things that they thought they were really funny because they were there. And they laughed hard because they hadn't slept in 2 days, and they bring it back and it's not funny at all. But they needed an objective person to tell them it wasn't funny. And also the very last day of the shoot, we were supposed to shoot the El Rey concert here in L.A. And it was a big plan to have all these other comedians come out, and Sarah Silverman, David Cross, and Louis C.K. were also going to come and join the show. And the day of the show, Louis C.K. got his deal to do his show at HBO, Lucky Louie, and HBO sent 2 lawyers to make sure we didn't shoot him at the show. They literally had lawyers standing next to the cameras, next to the cameraman.
Was he there? He wanted to perform?
Louis wanted to perform. He had agreed to perform, and he wouldn't not go on, but HBO wouldn't let us shoot him. David Cross had shot the Blue Man episode of Arrested Development that day, and he was completely covered head to toe in blue makeup and couldn't get it off fast. It would take hours to get out, so he wound up canceling. Bob Odenkirk did come, and it's anyway. So, but happened was Louis C.K. came on that night, and we couldn't tape it, and he killed. And instead of going out for 10 minutes, he went out for 25 minutes, and I think it kind of threw Patton set out of whack, and so it was a bunch of different things that I wasn't prepared for, but I'm very proud of that film and very proud of that show. And the other thing that came out of it was the director, Michael Blyden. He and Zach came in for a separate meeting, and they pitched me an idea of a special they wanted to do. And as a proof of concept, they did this thing where Zach lip-synced the Anita Baker song, and it is just hysterical. And I told him, I said, I bought him a camera, and I said, I'm going to give you the camera and $100,000 in cash, and whatever you bring back, we're going to put on Netflix. And it was Live from the Purple Onion, Zach Galifianakis. So, and I think it really was the start of Zach's kind of national profile. But anyway, we did a bunch of things. What else did we do that was worth talking about all these years later?
Born in a Brothel.
Born in a Brothels was an Oscar winner. We did the deal at Sundance for.
But the venture was that you were becoming a producer as well as licensing content.
Yeah.
That was the sort of
and basically,
takeaway.
It's funny how similar the motivations were then to what we're doing with Original now, which was we may not be able to get new interesting things. So how about we go, kind of move up the food chain a little bit, work with producers and directors and help them make it. There were a lot of gatekeepers that would keep people from making quality independent content. And how about if we let's not become another gatekeeper, let's become an enabler and help people who can't get their stuff made.
Now, so was there a backlash from the gatekeepers that you were doing this and allowing talent to come to you?
I don't think they were particularly threatened because we were doing, like I said, we were working on things that were kind of passion plays. Movies that would win Cannes, but weren't doing $100 million at box office. Which is a great place to work and cut your teeth. And I was very passionate and still remain very passionate about independent film and all the things we did at Red Envelope. I'm thrilled that we did them, and I do them today.
Yeah.
And I always felt like I was always surprised at things like Film Independent and the International Documentary Association, all these things that I always thought that we'd outgrow the need for them, that we could mainstream the behavior of watching, kind of interesting, niche-y things. And because I was so impressed with our ability to do it on DVD, One year, I remember doing the revenue share reporting with the studios, and The Last King. More people watched The Last King of Scotland on Netflix than the X-Men movie that came out that year. So we really were I wasn't trying to figure out a different way to make more money on small films. I was trying to find a national platform for small films.
So now, why did you shut down Red Envelope?
It didn't scale. We could do more of the same, but it wasn't growing to what we thought we could. It was more of a distraction to the business than it was a help to the business. And we were trying to sell DVDs. We were trying to do all kinds of stuff with the library, and we just were not really that well equipped to out monetize everybody else for the content.
But you took obviously some lessons from that venture, and then 3 years later, Netflix invests a lot of money and budget into original programming. So can you talk about your strategy for developing original programming starting in 2011, and why TV?
Well, we started in the DVD business. It was almost all movies,
Right.
and and box set DVDs, were part of the rental business, but very small. And people who, if you were a super fan, you bought the DVDs, So it really wasn't. It was mostly a way of watching movies. Netflix was, and I wonder if we had had a different name if that wasn't the case. But I do what we could license in those days, if the movies were pretty not interesting because they were so deep in their life. The pay TV holdbacks were they came to pay TV like 10 months after they came out in the theater, and then after that they would come onto a pay TV window for 18 months, and then they would go away for 5 years, and then they'd come back for 18 months. So you couldn't get to the movie for 9 years after it came out. So it wasn't very interesting. And one thing that could be interesting and fresh would be a TV show you didn't get a chance to watch. And what I think was the perfect, back to the, when I said that Red Envelope was ahead of its time, I said that because it was not successful. Arrested Development was ahead of its time, meaning it was great and the world wasn't ready for it yet. And the distribution models available to that show were not conducive to watching that show. So what I mean by that is every episode of Arrested Development has got 30 layers of comedy, 12 different storylines, 17 different characters. A punchline was set up in episode 1 that would pay off in episode 7. Yeah. And network television, as you know, is a little more random than that. So when the audience is watching an episode of television, it's a pretty good chance, I think like a 40% chance, they didn't see last week's episode. So Fox was struggling with Arrested Development because there was no way to watch it in a way you could follow it. So the show, we picked up Arrested Development as soon as it got canceled. And it was like kind of the perfect marriage of on-demand TV, because you could binge watch, you could watch them back to back to back. So when you could watch the joke set up in episode 1 and see the payoff in episode 7 in one sitting.
It made sense.
And it made sense. You could track it. And so that was a big breakthrough. And then it was the freshness of a show that was just on TV versus a movie that was made 10 plus years ago, I think is one of the big drivers of why we moved into television.
At the time, an unprecedented deal, $100 million, 2-season, no pilot with David Fincher.
Yeah.
Talk about how that deal came about, why you thought that was the right fit, and why you took such a big chance on that show.
So we were meeting at Netflix with a company called MRC, who mostly make independent films, large-scale independent films, and sell to the studios. And we were talking to they had this anomaly that they owned the pay TV rights to, I think, the Bruno movie, the Sacha Baron Cohen film. And they were talking about this deal of how we could buy the pay TV rights out from underneath the studio. And at the end of the meeting, they said, by the way, we are taking out our first TV show, and we bought the rights to this British TV show called House of Cards, which I knew very well. I loved the show, watched it on DVD. We have David Fincher's directing the pilot and exec producing. Kevin Spacey, when that was a really good thing. Robin Wright are going to star. And Beau Willimon wrote the first 3 scripts already, and they're really great. And he's nominated for an Oscar this year. Right. So we said, yeah, do you guys want to look at it? And we were not in the business of original programming at all. And I said, we'd love to look at it. And Cindy Holland was in the meeting with me. She was also a big fan of the British House of Cards. And we started talking about it, and I said, if what we are all building here is true, and that all filmed entertainment is going to come in, and that basically that, and that all TV networks and channels would become .coms, that ABC eventually would become an app, and we talked about this very confidently for many years. If all that's true, then what are the chances that any of these channels any of these networks are going to sell us their programming in any window? They're going to need it for themselves. So if that's the case, then we better get good at doing this ourselves. A little bit back to the red envelope again.
Yeah.
So if we're ever going to try it, what I would be afraid of is saying, let's start small. And then because we get a negative read on it, basically you'd do a small thing and it wouldn't be a very big deal and no one would care that much about it and it didn't work, and then we'd say, well, let's not do original programming. It doesn't work. So I said, let's actually do it the biggest possible. And I couldn't think of a package that was as attractive as this one.
And how did you know that would be so attractive? 2 seasons, no
the
pilot.
deal?
Yeah.
But it was almost like a Hail Mary. Because you think about it, if you had put together this package and, with all those elements, everybody wanted it. I know HBO wanted it. I know FX wanted it. And there was no reason to sell it to Netflix. We've never launched an original anything. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we're going to transform the business on it, that we would know how to market it, that we'd know how to launch it, those are all not a given. So what I said was, we said, look, let's go for this. And I called back MRC and I said, look, we don't. And at the time they were inviting everyone to come to Sony, where David was working on a film, and they were going to do the pitch to everybody at Sony on Saturday. And I said, we don't want to come on Saturday. I'm telling you yes right now. And I want to come on Monday and meet David and tell him why he should do it with us.
You wanted to pitch him.
I wanted to pitch him on Netflix. And I walked in the room. Cindy was with me then, and I'm trying to think, but probably just the two of us. And I said, there's 1,000 reasons not to do this at Netflix. I want to give you one reason to say yes, which is I'm going to give you 2 seasons with no pilot and no notes, and you have absolute creative freedom. And the only thing we ask is that you have to put your name on it. So theoretically, he could have given us 26 hours of home movies, but I figured that David Fincher wouldn't do that.
The name was the key.
He cared about his brand.
Sure.
He cares about quality. He was going to make a great television show. So I said, look, we'll figure everything else out, but that's the deal. And they made a couple of phone calls after that and called and said yes. So.
And you didn't need a pilot.
No. Well, what I knew was we'd had no history of. I knew that first of all the hierarchy of buying a show started with either a development deal, or a pilot, and then a direct to season, which was pretty unheard of back then, and then direct to 2 seasons, never heard of. I never heard of any of that ever happening. Mm-hmm. So I really needed to give that. It made no sense for him to sell me the show, so we had to give him an unheard of reason to do it.
But you also don't have the problem of ratings and overnights and network notes, and
right.
So it was completely coming at it from a different.
And we never made a TV show. I didn't know I needed to know. I didn't know I needed to know any of that. So I remember this beautiful idea of creative autonomy, mostly driven by the fact I had no staff. I had nobody to interfere with them.
Right.
But we also, even the idea of binge, everything we had on Netflix we had bought in the season after it aired on television. So it was delivered to us in full seasons, and we put everything up at the same time.
Did he have any reservation about that? Was that confusing to understand why you spent how many months working on this show, and then you're just going to put it all up at once? Like, how did you sell that?
It's funny, they never really did. They never was a real problem. And we didn't know that's how we wanted to do it. When we said yes, remember the show wouldn't come for another 18 months after the deal was done, and we had we started thinking about it, and as it was getting closer to ready to launch. How are we going to launch these episodes? I mean, someone asked the question, and no one had even asked, which was, is this weekly? Is this monthly? How are we going to do this? And we just kind of decided because we didn't know, we said, let's just put them all up like everything else. It didn't make sense to have 1,000 things on Netflix all at once and one show, one a week. Mm-hmm. So we just said, put them all up. And to their credit, they never really did balk at that at all. And it turned out to be the thing that immediately distinguished Netflix from everyone else on television was this show. And I think the other thing was the creative prospect was the creative that was driven from having the 2-season order was that when they started writing episode 1, they knew there would be a 26th hour for sure.
Right.
Wasn't going to get canceled. Didn't have to write for, so basically so I think it enabled them to plant seeds and creative seeds all along the way, knowing that there was positively going to be a 26th hour.
It's a creator's dream.
Yeah, and the idea too that what I said earlier about a good 40% of the audience not having seen last week's episode, which made television become very repetitive and full of introspection and saying, look, remember, I know you didn't see last week, so I have to tell you what happened last week in some other way. So eventually, a big chunk of the episodes are talking about what happened in previous episodes. Where if you're watching on Netflix, you definitely saw the last episode. You probably just saw it, so they didn't have to do all that. So it actually enabled the hour of television with no commercials and with no backstory in every episode. You could actually get 20-30% more storytelling in every episode. Right. So it's a kind of richer, denser. So actually the way that it was being distributed actually influenced the way that it was written, which was very different than everything else on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. Now, being such a fan of television and waiting Sunday night to see, your Mary Hartman or whatever you were watching, was there any reluctance or hesitation on your part to saying, I'm taking away destination television. I'm taking away that everyone gathers around the television on the same night and watches it together.
I wonder if when we talked earlier about my growing up, even with the kind of non-traditional household that we had, we did have TV rituals. Like my dad loves everything about the 50s. So we hardly ever went to the movies when we were kids as a family, unless it was a movie out about the 50s. We saw American Hot Wax, American Graffiti,
Diner,
American everything. We saw, and we definitely watched Happy Days. I remember, and we always watched Love American Style together at our house. I absolutely remember watching the Happy Days episode of Love American Style that became the episode of. And one of the things that we did on Sunday, Mary Hartman aired as a soap, a daily soap in Phoenix, so it aired during the day. And so most people couldn't watch it. So on Sunday night, they would air all 5 episodes together. So it was the first binge of my life was in 1975, I guess, where they would air 5 episodes back to back on Sunday night. And my parents, God bless them for being young, would let us stay up late on Sunday night and watch TV till 12:30 in the morning. To watch Mary Hartman every week.
Right.
So we did have appointments in that way. And my life seemed kind of regimented around TV, meaning I definitely wanted to get home in time to see this or that. And I think what we were doing, I was consciously trying to break that. I was trying to open up the access to it. And that the idea that I grew up in a generation that if you overslept on Saturday mornings, there were no cartoons that week.
That's right. You missed out.
Yeah. So my kids have never known a world that didn't have cartoons on demand in some form or another, either on video or on demand or just on demand TV or whatever. But if you overslept on Saturday morning, there was no cartoons that week. So I wasn't consciously breaking that habit. I really felt like I was just enabling access to the programming to more people.
And then the people just seem to adjust, right, to the. Yeah. What people always say is the water cooler moment, which it's a different thing now, right?
Yeah.
What happened? What episode are you on?
Yeah, it's a new etiquette, basically. Before we talk about this show, tell me where you are.
Right.
And I think people adapt to it really quickly.
It's surprisingly.
Yeah.
Did you ever, when you were parodied on SNL for the Endless Queue, and people parodied the binge watch and things like that? How do you take that?
That's an arrival moment. To be parodied on SNL, that's pretty great. I think we've been parodied on South Park, on SNL, and then I got the real joy of appearing as myself on an episode of The Simpsons. And
about binge watching.
Yeah, about binge watching.
That was
so
amazing.
I do think it's all cultural kind of milestones, which are awesome.
Totally. So getting back to House of Cards, that show was the first Emmy for an internet streaming show that Netflix took home.
Yeah.
What was that moment like for you?
Well, it was You know, in the first meeting, I did tell them, because I realized midway through our pitch to them that I didn't know if we qualified for Emmys.
Right.
So I said to them, I don't know if this show will qualify. So if it's the best work of your life, it may be the most star-studded Webby Awards of all time, but I don't know that if we'll qualify for the Emmy, I'll check. And sure enough, a couple of years before that, the rules were adjusted, so we
I remember it was a
qualify.
question.
Yeah.
I remember it was a question.
Yeah.
There was some people who didn't think it should be.
Yeah, no, a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think the great moment of that was basically it's a show that won a primetime Emmy, having never aired on television, let alone in prime time. You know, so
Or did it?
well,
Because-
it did for some people. If you watched it at 7, if you watched it between 7 and 9, you did, or 7 and 10, you did.
But I mean, what is television?
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to that. It's moving pictures in a box. Is this? I mean, that's been true since the beginning of television, of what
Right.
it is, and none of it was ever tied to the pipe that was delivering it, or the time of day it was airing, or was it in black and white or color, or any of those things. So I think at the end of the day, it's about visual storytelling, and that's what defines it at the end of the day. And I think that TV has been incredibly progressive in this relative to film, you know, which is still very much hung up on what is the definition of a film, not based on the creative, but based on the distribution model.
When a lot's changed in the culture since House of Cards first came on the air, and I think you made the decision to continue in season 6 without Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you came to that decision?
There was I think, a fundamental unfairness about everything that was happening to everybody but Kevin Spacey. Meaning the idea that I knew firsthand there's about 2,500 people whose livelihood depended on the production of that show. I'm talking about people who live in Baltimore, who work in hotels and restaurants, and electricians and carpenters and drivers, and then the 300 or so people who actually worked directly making that show, and that they didn't do anything wrong. And why was this whole thing, and the millions of fans, and they didn't do anything wrong. Why should everyone else have to pay the price for whatever did or didn't happen? And my thought was, you know, let's not punish everybody. Let's keep going.
And is that ultimately your decision? How
Yeah.
involved are you with the day-to-day of decisions involving programming and shows like that?
That's a big one. I mean, right now, I have a phenomenal team who have absolute green light power. So I don't have to be in the room to get a show on Netflix.
With the huge success of House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, there seemed to be a shift in the way you and Reed were talking about what is Netflix becoming. Was there a shift between it being a data tech media internet company to a content creator network?
Yeah, definitely. The shift is, I think, just how we talk about it. I think we made and it was probably an accidental decision around. I didn't want to move when I joined Netflix. I didn't want to leave LA and move to Silicon Valley. There was an understanding that I would at one point. And I did say early on, I said, you know, all the business I have to do is going to be in LA. If we live up there, I'm going to be back and forth all the time. I'm going to disrupt my family, and then it'd be much better for me to be here and fly up there once in a while. And the other thing is that television is a relationship business. So you have to be in the ecosystem, and you know, there's something. It's a trust business because there is no suggested retail price for a show. You know, so you have to really trust each other and know each other well, and you can't do that from out of town. So the idea being, you know, didn't want to be the out of towner. They would come in with a lawyer and write a check and go back home, and everyone would snicker. And we wanted to be in and of this business and in and of the town. So I didn't move. And so I think from early on, we went from, if you did work in the tech side of the business, and the Silicon Valley culture was very conducive to making you feel like you worked at the best tech company in the world. And if you worked for Netflix in LA, which at the time was just me, but I always felt like it was an entertainment company from the first time we joined. And then as the company kept growing in LA, everyone in LA felt like they worked in an entertainment company. and our offices all over the world now, depending on what you do. It's very much a tech company or an entertainment company, depending on where you stand. But we've always had, from the beginning of, or at least since I joined in 2000, a foot firmly planted in Hollywood and a foot firmly planted in Silicon Valley. But now, we're doing local language original production now in 13 countries, and in those countries, it's pretty much that same dynamic. They're probably more, because the technology is more global and the content can be very local, that they may feel more like entertainment companies in that market, because they're using the tech from further away. But it's always been kind of a both and not an either or.
Is there a Netflix brand?
So I think the brand, I've always been careful to say I didn't want our shows to define our brand, and I didn't want our brand to define our shows. Because I think our brand ultimately is personalization. Our brand ultimately is your favorite show, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever mood you're in. So if you find a show that you love, that's our brand. And so I'm always careful not to have it like our show. We don't have a network for people from age this to this, or men or female or whatever. It is really your favorite show.
Yeah.
And it is that absorbent, I guess, a brand, that it can be, and it enables us to have the brand be about satisfaction and excellence and matching. So when I say a great show, it's a great show because you love it. And nothing to do with what the critics think, nothing to do with how it's rated, because you love it. That's what makes it a great show.
And we're going to talk about data and how you get that direct feedback. Really quickly, I want to talk about Stranger Things, because it's almost the opposite of David Fincher. It's Duffer Brothers were complete unknowns, right, when they came
I did want to go back one thing.
Oh, yeah.
You asked about the House of Cards. Did they mind the binging, putting it all at once? They didn't, but our first show that we launched was Lilyhammer, and Stevie Van Zandt did not like that. And we did the deal for House of Cards first, but Lilyhammer launched before House of Cards. And when I told Stevie that we intended to put them up all at once, his thing was, he said, well, no, we've been working on this thing for 6 months, it's our whole life. And I finally said to him, I said, yeah, just like an album.
like a Springsteen
Like
album.
a Springsteen album. You spent all year writing those songs and recording, and now we're just going to drop it all at once. He goes, oh, okay.
But it makes sense. I mean, it's almost, especially when they know they had 26 episodes with House of Cards, that it's meant to be viewed as a whole.
Yeah.
It's a whole, that's the art.
Yeah.
So it kind of does make sense.
Right.
Like, go to my art show, listen to my album, watch the whole thing.
And I, when I read a book, sometimes I'm just in the mood and I'll read all night. And then other times I just got a few minutes and I'll grab a couple of pages and pick it up later.
The point is the choice.
The point is the choice, and basically thinking about a book, thinking about it more like a novel than that's in chapters. And if all the chapters had to be the same length, and you would have to read them one a week, you probably wouldn't read very many books.
Do you think it's improved the viewer experience overall?
100%.
And why?
I think it's improved the relationship with characters. So I think what was evolving around television was, back when I was the kid watching TV all the time. I mean, I knew when I watched All in the Family, I knew Archie Bunker's first and last name. I knew his wife Edith Bunker. I knew Mike Stivic. I knew his wife Gloria. I knew they had a kid named Joey. I knew that he worked at the dock. I mean, I knew you knew everything about these characters. And I think people were developing such a casual relationship with content because they were watching so much of it kind of randomly prior to this, that it became a drift. Sometimes it was on purpose, like you never really knew what Chandler did on Friends, but there's some of that stuff I'm sure was a creative choice, but for the most part, I think people's relationship with programming was drifting, and I think when you sign up for a 50-hour binge of a show, you're going to know everything. Hopefully, you're going to know everything about those characters and really develop a deep relationship with them at the first and last name level. And I do think that the binging and the access to do it has helped that a lot.